Hello everyone. Today I want to go back in time, specifically to September 2023, just over a year ago, when Microsoft was still in the process of purchasing ZeniMax Media and all of the studios underneath that umbrella, including Bethesda Softworks. In the process of this review, many legal documents become public record, and there was an accidental upload of a 2020 planned release schedule. It was never supposed to be released, but it was accidentally attached to a separate document and then uploaded to the court record. Once this document became visible to the public, which was a 5-year release schedule, fans went bananas. Because it was accidentally published in court filings, there was never any question about whether or not it was a legitimate schedule. It was just a question of how likely is it that any of the information on this list would actually come to pass. And the reason I'm talking about it today is because that release schedule has finally hit the end of its original intended life. It started in 2020 and then stretched to 2024. Now, normally a 5-year release schedule would be completely useless moving into the first year that it does not cover. But we also had something strange happen in 2020, and it was called a pandemic. I shouldn't have to explain this, but when the pandemic happened, scheduling for just about everything was entirely upended, which means that everything on that release schedule is a little bit more flexible than you would normally expect. Games experience development delays all the time. You throw in a global pandemic and all of a sudden, they can take a lot longer. So I took a half hour to go over all of the games on this release schedule and figure out which ones are out, which ones were late, and which ones are still just non-existent. I won't go over all the details, but so far, this is basically what I figured out. And essentially, most everything that's supposed to be published on this list has actually come to pass, and the most delay that we see on any of these projects is 2 years. And this is what brings us to the possibility of an Oblivion Remaster. You see, it was originally supposed to come out in 2022, but obviously that didn't come to pass, and more importantly, since then, we have heard nothing. No mention, no leak, not even a passing nod to acknowledge its existence. And more importantly, if you look at the entire list, it's 63% accurate. 17 out of the 27 games on it have either come out or the advertising campaign that leads up to the release of a game has started. And again, if you look at the whole list, nothing on it is really releasing any later than 2 years past its original suggested release date. So where does that land us with an Oblivion Remaster? Well, if it was supposed to come out in 2022 and it's 2 years later, 2024, and we still haven't heard anything, it means we've missed the window. Using that line of reasoning, it probably means we're not going to get an Oblivion Remaster. And don't misunderstand me. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I don't want to be someone who tells everybody to shelve your dreams and stuff like that, because I would really, really, really like an Oblivion Remaster to happen because it was the game that got me into the Elder Scrolls in the first place. I played it, then I went back and I played through Morrowind exhaustively, and I played through Skyrim exhaustively. In fact, at this point, what I should probably do is actually just put my nose to the grindstone and enjoy some Elder Scrolls Online, although I'm not much of an MMO player. On a side note, I don't know what's going on inside of ZeniMax Online Studios, but they are beasts. If you look at the entire release schedule, they have never missed a release. Even in the middle of the pandemic, nothing held them back. If they came up late, they only did it by months. Every year, there's another update to that game. Says to me that there's probably a lot of value in it. Anyway, regardless of whether or not I think that an Oblivion Remaster will happen, let's set my opinion to the side and just assume it will. And let's talk about what it would actually take to remaster this 2006 classic. The first thing we need to address is what is a remaster. I've seen some confusion around this. There's a major difference between a remake and a remaster. A remake is rebuilding a game from the ground up. It means that you recycle almost none of the original assets. Maybe you reuse some of the actual audio. A remaster, however, is where you take the entirety of the original game and you try to get it running on new hardware, usually meaning that you get it into a new game engine, you put new textures on it that are higher resolution, maybe you do a little bit of brushing up of the audio if it was ever kind of spotty in the first place. A remaster is fundamentally digging your hands into the original game itself and seeing what needs fixing to get it running on modern equipment. Another way to put it is that a remake is basically knocking down the house and completely rebuilding it, trying to make it look just about exactly the same, but way better. And a remaster is anywhere from a remodel to a renovation, with a remodel being fixing all of the visuals and a renovation being stripping everything down to the studs and maybe even addressing some of the structural integrity issues. And a lot of this comes down to your game engine and whether or not it's moved into the future or if it has become defunct. In the case of Bethesda and the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, it runs on the Gamebryo engine, which is technically the same engine that Bethesda built Starfield on. Let's try not to get into the problems that Starfield has, but we can acknowledge that they did upgrade and improve their game engine, now called the Creation Engine 2, to run Starfield on it. But there's a problem. The Creation Engine 2 is several iterations removed from the Gamebryo engine that Bethesda used in 2006. In fact, it's 4 generations removed, because after Oblivion, you had Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4, and then Starfield. That's 4 separate generations of updates and modifications to the engine, meaning that the assets that you actually have in Oblivion, you might not be able to just pull them out of that and put them into the new engine. More importantly, Oblivion as a whole has a lot of, well, it's rough around the edges. I'll never forget whenever Skyrim came out, and it legitimately felt amazing because it essentially felt like Oblivion with all of the corners rounded off, all of the rough edges sanded down, all of the nitpicky problems that I had with Oblivion were sorted out and cleaned up in Skyrim. Most notable of which to me was the fact that while the world leveled up with you, you didn't have bandits at the end of the game wearing Daedric and glass armor. That was always a really weird one to me. Why are the bandits squatting in a cave when the armor that they're wearing would basically pay for their entire lifestyle to change? So there was just in general a lot more finesse and a lot of sensible upgrades from Oblivion. That's what made Skyrim feel significantly like essentially Oblivion 2.0, even though it had a completely different art style. But that's not all. The original Oblivion also did not have integrated controller support, at least on the PC. That would be something else that they would need to address. The fact that you weren't able to basically snap back and forth from minimum to maximum items with a controller when buying, selling, or storing things in a chest. There's also the fact that there was limited NPC scripting in Oblivion. The best way for me to describe this is the similar but different ways that both games handle vampirism. In both games, when you contract vampirism, and I'm not talking about the Dawnguard version of vampirism, I'm just talking about the basic version that you catch whenever you fight vampires in a cave. First, the disease itself has to incubate for 3 days. If you don't treat that illness within 3 days, it blooms into full-blown vampirism, and you become an actual vampire. As an actual vampire, there are 4 stages of it. The first 24 hours, you're a level 1 vampire. The second 24 hours, you're a level 2 vampire. Third and fourth. So it takes 4 days. Okay. And every single day that you go without feeding on blood, you become more vampiric, more of a monster. And as a result, you become stronger. Now, the major difference between these two things, aside of the bonuses that you get, because the 2 games handle the bonuses differently, is that in Oblivion, you did not advance through those stages of vampirism if you didn't sleep. If you slept in a bed, your vampirism would advance to the next stage and you would become more of a monster and you would become more horrifying and stronger. And ultimately, at stage 4, if you tried to talk to somebody, they would be scared. If you tried to talk to a shopkeep, they wouldn't talk to you because you're obviously a vampire. But that's it. They wouldn't call a guard. They wouldn't try to attack you. If you went and tried to talk to a guard, though, they'd just call you a beast and immediately engage in actual combat. Skyrim, however, you didn't have to sleep to advance through those stages. If you just went 4 days, it would happen naturally. There was no manual or hard set trigger for you to hit in Skyrim, and as a result, you could just be hanging out in Rift and doing your normal thing for the Thieves Guild, and then all of a sudden you turn over to stage 4 vampirism and every guard in the Rift wants you dead instantly. That was the major difference. It was a scripting situation where in Oblivion, there were these hard locks where you had to engage with the NPCs before certain things would start to happen. Meanwhile, in Skyrim, none of those hard locks existed. They would just happen, smooth, fluid, and without any interruption. That's a major scripting difference, and it was seen everywhere, front to back, start to finish, in the difference between Oblivion and Skyrim. I don't see an Oblivion Remaster happening without addressing that issue, because if you don't update that scripting, the game is a lot more harsh, it's a lot more janky, it's a lot more, well, just lacking in finesse. You kind of need to address those scripting limitations to pull it out of its cobweb-ridden coffin, I guess, and update it to the modern age, because whether we like it or not, Oblivion is an old game, and it does show its age. Another major thing that affects all of this scripting and how NPCs interact with the main character is how the Gamebryo engine, which Oblivion was built on, had no multi-core processor support. And this is where I'm going to have to do a little bit of explaining for anybody who's not a tech head, but basically a processor is the item inside of any computer that does all of the complicated math that allows it to do all of the fancy stuff that it does. Now, back in 2006, we were basically at the end of a 30-year life cycle of having processors inside of computers that only had one core. So one core does one set of calculations, and it can only do so many calculations so fast. This was also the time when multi-core processors became common in consumer goods. Basically, one single processor which could have multiple cores, and each core would do different processes at the same time in parallel. Hopefully, it's obvious that this resulted in the processing power of what you could do with a computer drastically increasing. There was a problem, though, with two processors doing two different sets of calculations at the same time. If they didn't sync up and the calculations came out in time with each other, programs would crash. This created a lot of headaches for programmers, and during the generation of the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, when we first started to see multi-core processors built into gaming systems, there were tons of headaches and a lot of jank in games because programmers didn't really know how exactly to program for multi-core systems. But you could still program single-core games on a multi-core setup. This is when Oblivion came out, and it was made for personal computers first, and then ported over to consoles, which had the multi-core processors. PCs at the time didn't really have anything beyond single core, and if you did have a multi-core processor in 2006, you had a lot of money that most PC gamers didn't have. So, Oblivion was never meant to run on a multi-core setup. None of the scripting was ever meant to run on a multi-core setup. So, the question becomes, can you pull all of the assets, all of the textures, all of the models, all of the audio, and plug them into a new version of the same engine? But more importantly, the code in the game is what ties all of those assets together and makes them work, which raises the question, when you pull it out of the old engine and plug it into the new engine, does it still work, or does it break because it was never designed to run on a multi-core system? Now we are getting into the supremely messy territory of how you recode a remaster to run on a multi-core system when it was designed to only run on a single processing core. And if it is actually going to ever happen, that, I would hazard a guess, is the main reason we haven't seen hide nor hair of one. But we are missing one more critical detail. If I am understanding the situation correctly with the coding and moving the game from an old engine to a new engine and all of the work that would entail, what justifies actually doing this? Will the game sell enough, or is there another incentive? Is there another financial incentive to actually go through doing this? And the answer, it's called Creation Club. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to make anybody feel bad for having extra content and add-ons to a game, but Creation Club is just paid mods. And more importantly, Creation Club, the more you interact with it on Bethesda's existing games, the more you realize they are shoved in there as sugar high. They are not put in there to be balanced. They're not put in there to enhance the quality of the game. They're there to create low quality fruit, frankly. They're big, they're plump, they're juicy, they're very sugary, they're good for maybe 5 seconds, a little bit like candy that you get out of the store, and then the flavor's gone and you spit it out. And that is a great way to continuously monetize an old game, by jamming microtransactions into it. And there will always be people who pay, regardless of my opinion on it. So, Yeah, that's your situation with an Oblivion Remaster, and the reason why I don't think we're going to see one, and even if we do, what it's going to mean. Basically, an old game brought into the modern age, regardless of how difficult that would be, specifically to sell microtransactions. Not a great conclusion. But there is one other thing that may encourage a remaster to actually come to fruition, and it's called the Fallout TV show. Fallout 3 is not that much different coding-wise from Oblivion. It has its own set of problems, and having that available when the Fallout TV show sees its second season would be a great thing for them to capitalize on. So maybe, just maybe, we'll see an Oblivion remaster because the Fallout TV show gets Bethesda to figure out how to get their old games running on modern equipment because they want it to be available when the second season of the Fallout TV show happens. Just a thought. Anyways, that's everything from me. I'm William Strife. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.